I have had a mixed beginning of the year. I lost two of my friends unexpectedly. One had gone to Alabama to visit her family, and she was going to come back this past Tuesday. And I hadn't really talked to her since she'd been gone. She usually calls me once or twice. And then New Year's Eve, I pick up the phone and, is this Karen? And I'm saying yes, and then she's talking, and I'm about to say to her, why don't you stop playing on the phone? And she says, no, this is Betty's sister, and I just wanted you to know your name was on, she had this sheet that she had given to several of us here in this area, and told us that if there was ever an emergency, this was the list of numbers that she wanted called. And of course my name was on it, and she says, well, Betty died this morning. And I'm like, what? And so they had the funeral yesterday. The wake was Friday, funeral was yesterday. Unfortunately, I had other commitments and I couldn't go. But I would have liked to have gone, but we're going to arrange something for her here. And then that same day, one of my favorite musical artists, Natalie Cole, died. And Monday, I got a call saying that another friend of ours had gone to the gym, and she watched her diet, and she was always working out. And she went in the locker room, and they found her in there slumped over, and she was gone. So her funeral is tomorrow. So it's been quite a start to the new year. I hope yours was better than that. But I was very happy to be here today. My topic for today is for such a time as this, and it's from the book of Esther. And the book of Esther is one of only two books in the Bible that are named for women. The other one is Ruth. But Esther was the story of how the festival of Purim in the Jewish faith began. It began with her. And the scripture is Esther 4, verse 14. And it says, for if you keep silent at such a time as this, relief and deliverance will rise from another quarter, but you and your father's family will perish. Who knows? Perhaps you have come to royal dignity for just such a time as this. And I'll explain that as we go on. Because I believe that we are all here at this time for just such a time as this. And I'll explain that as we go on. The Bible story related to Queen Esther revolves around events that occurred around 485 BC, when the Persians and the Medes were in control of 127 provinces from India to Ethiopia. Now the Jews at this time had been exiled, but they had been released from Persia to return to Jerusalem to live and rebuild their temple. Many of them, though, chose to stay in Persia, and they were welcome. They had a very tolerant king, Ahasuerus, also called Xerxes. And he was said to have been a good king, and he hosted banquets and festivals for those in the top echelons of government and for the people in the palace as well. So he was kind of might say, a party animal. So one evening they were having a good time, and they had gotten kind of loose, with the drinking and so forth. And these banquets lasted for a while, several days. And on the seventh day of one of these, everyone was a little tipsy. And the king sent for his eunuchs. And they had eunuchs at the palace. If you don't know what those are, then I'll explain. But I think everybody knows what that whole thing is all about. And he told them to go and get the queen. And her name was Vashti. So go get Vashti, because he wanted to show her off, because she was a very pretty woman. And I want to show her off. And he told her that she was to come, and she was to come with only the crown on her head. So that meant that she wouldn't have on any clothes. Now it doesn't say that exactly, but it does say only that she is to wear her royal crown. So that kind of takes care of that. So supposedly she received the summons while she was having a party of her own. She was hosting a banquet. And she did the unthinkable. She refused to come. Well, her king was not too happy about that. And it was said that the many men there thought, well, he doesn't know how to control his woman, so how is he going to control a whole kingdom? So he was embarrassed by that. And he asked some of those upper echelon officials, well, what do you think I should do? This woman, I told her to come, and she won't come. So what am I to do? This is embarrassing for me. So one Haman, who was the prime minister, and we'll talk about him a little bit more, Haman and some of the other men consulted with the king, and they said, well, you have to get rid of her. You don't have a choice, because this just doesn't look good. So he banished Queen Vashti, and he became a little lonely. Now she hadn't seen him that much because he had been busy, but when the king calls you, you go. So he decided that he was going to marry again. So they had what would be considered in modern terms probably a beauty pageant, which they paraded all the girls in the kingdom, kind of like Cinderella, where they parade all the girls in the kingdom in front of the king, and he would meet with them for a short period of time, and then, he was supposed to decide that. Well, Esther, who was the niece of Mordecai, who was a Jewish person, and as was Esther, and he told her, he made sure that she would go, and she was not to reveal that they were Jewish, she was just to go. Well, Esther was very beautiful also, and when he saw her, he was quite impressed. The king was quite impressed, and he chose Esther as his queen. Now, she could not use her Jewish name, so thus Esther, her Jewish name was Hadassah. But he said, no, you can't let anyone know that, even though the king was very tolerant, we can't let anyone know that we're of that faith. So she moved into the palace, and her uncle was granted a position. He was at the gate to the city. Now, Esther rose from humble beginnings to be the queen. She became an orphan at an early age. Her father died while her mother was carrying her, and her mother died when she was born. So her mother died in childbirth, but she didn't know either one of her parents. So she was raised by her uncle Mordecai, and he adopted her as her daughter. So she was lucky in that sense. And she was also lucky in the sense that he cared about her and he wanted the best for her. Now, Mordecai was at the gate, and he overheard two of the eunuchs discussing their plan to assassinate the king. So when he heard this, he goes and he tells Esther, you better make sure that the king knows what's going on. Well, when the king found out, the eunuchs were hanged, and Mordecai was given a responsible job other than just standing at the gate. But this was forgotten by the king, and I'm mentioning that now because it's going to figure later on in the story. A record, even though he had forgotten about it, a record of Mordecai's having saved the king's life was made in the court chronicles. Now Haman, who was the other character in the story, the Agagite, and the richest man in the kingdom, was appointed by the king to be the prime minister. And his seat placed him above everybody. He was number 2 in line to the king. So all the king's subjects were ordered to honor Haman and bow down to him. So this tells you about this guy's ego here. Everybody did. Everyone complied except Mordecai. So he says, well, Mordecai says, I can't do that because Haman wore a large medallion engraved with the picture of an idol on the chest, and it was forbidden for the Jewish to honor idols. And he says, well, if I bow down to you, I'm honoring that idol, and I can't do that. So Haman was upset. And he goes to the king and he says, there is one nation scattered throughout your kingdom which is different from all other nations. He's talking about the Hebrews. They don't eat our food, drink our wine, or marry our daughters. They keep themselves apart. They don't keep the king's laws, and they don't work. Every seventh day they rest, and they are always celebrating holidays. If you give me permission, I will destroy them for you. And not only would I destroy them for you, I'll pay for it out of my own pocket. This was just how upset he was. The king approved Haman's request and allowed him to use this ring to seal the official decree. So therefore, the law was enacted, saying that all Jews were to be executed. And the king, he didn't understand exactly what he was signing. So Haman was happy. The next thing he had to do was establish a date for this execution. And to that end, he cast lots to determine the perfect day and the time to complete the task. The 13th day of the month, Adar, spelled A-D-A-R, which is roughly equivalent to February, March, in the Jewish calendar, was chosen and announced to the authorities of the 127 provinces in the kingdom. And the decree read, on the 30th day of the month of Adar, you are to destroy, kill, and slaughter all Jews, young and old, women and children, all in one day. Their money and property will then belong to you. So they gave him a little incentive there. Upon hearing the decree, Mordecai ripped his clothing and placed ashes on his forehead as a sign of mourning. He prevailed upon Esther, his niece, to go to the king to dissuade him from carrying out the decree, emphasizing the fact that she herself would be subject to death if this were to happen. Now Esther was fearful, and she resisted this for two reasons. Number one, she would have to reveal her true heritage. And number two, there was a law that stated that the king must first summon her as a woman before she could appear before him. So in other words, that's your husband, but you can't go to see him if he hasn't called you. So stay where you are until you're called upon. So this made her a little nervous, a little more than a little nervous. So Mordecai sent her a message reminding her that if all the Jews were killed, she and her father's house would also be destroyed. So she wouldn't escape herself. So he tells her, do not think that in the king's place you will escape any more than all the others, because you're just like everybody else in this instance. If you keep silence at such a time as this, relief and deliverance will rise for the Jews from another quarter, but you and your father's family will perish. Who knows? And again he reminds her, perhaps you have come to royal dignity for such a time as this. So Esther acquiesced, and she told him to have all the Jews to fast and pray for her for 3 days. And this was in preparation for her going before the king. And to fast in the revealing word means to abstain from negative thinking. So you all pray and think positive before we do this. And not only did Mordecai have the adults do it, he gathered all the children and he had them to pray too. So at the end of the 3 days of prayer and fasting, Esther went to the king unannounced. Now she's standing outside in, I guess it would be a hallway, and he sees her there. And she's not supposed to be there. She could have been killed. But he summons her in because he loved her and he wanted to find out what was going on. So she goes in and he asks her, she tells him that she has a request. And he asks her, well, what is your request, my queen? Half of my kingdom is yours for the asking. Esther asks only that the king and Haman, his prime minister, attend a private banquet. So it would just be the three of them. At the banquet, the king once again asked her, well, what is your wish? Whatever you want is yours. What do you want? But instead of saying anything about what she wanted, her answer was to give them another invitation for him and Haman to attend another banquet. So again, just the three of them. So Haman, it's like, I'm hot stuff. I'm going to a banquet with the king and his queen, and I'm the only other person invited. Wow. So he joyfully runs from the room, and he rushes past the gate where everybody bows, but Mordecai will not bow. So his joy turns to anger, and he goes home, and he vents to the wife. And the wife says, well, you're going to have to get rid of him, obviously, first. So I tell you what you do. Why don't you build the gallows, and then you can do it as soon as you can get permission from the king, because he wasn't going to do it without the permission from the king. He knew better than to do that. So in the meantime, the king had a sleepless night. And to calm himself, he asked one of the eunuchs to read to him from the royal book. Now, it just so happens that the heavy book fell open to the story of how Mordecai the Jew had warned of the plot against the king and saved the king's life. Now, remember, he had forgotten it. So, you got a little divine order here. So the king asked, what reward did the Jew receive? And the reply was, none, sir. We just wrote it down and we forgot about it. And the king says, you mean to say that he saved my life and received no reward? He was very upset. He was angry about that. At that point, someone knocks on the door. It was Haman. And he was coming to ask permission to hang Mordecai right away, because he was in so much of a hurry that he just couldn't wait till in the morning. So I want to do it right now. I'm ready. I've got everything together. I want to do it right now. So Mordecai, being aware of this, sends Esther another message, and he tells her the same thing, reminding her that if all the Jews were killed, she and her father's house, including her, would be destroyed. And he tells her, you have to do that. Perhaps you have come to royal dignity for just such a time as this. So Haman goes home, and he's preparing to do what he has to do. But in the meantime, the king, remembering, says, well, we didn't do anything for him. So Haman comes in, while Haman is there to ask permission to hang Mordecai. Well, the king speaks first, of course, and the king says, oh, we have somebody here that I want to honor. And he says, well, do you have any ideas about how we can honor him? He was taking a poll there. So Haman, in his arrogance and in his pride and in his ego, he says, let him wear the king's royal robes. Because who does he think the king is talking about? He thinks the king is talking about him. Says, place the king's royal crown upon his head. Let him ride the king's royal horse, and let a servant walk before the horse and cry out, thus shall be done to the man whom the king wishes to honor. Now realizing that it wasn't him he was talking about. He was talking about what he believed to be his mortal enemy, Mordecai. So the king says, oh, that's just great. Man, you have some good ideas. He thought that was a wonderful idea. And he ordered Haman to go and find Mordecai and do exactly as he had described down to the last detail. So you were the one that came up with it. You know exactly what to do. So I don't have to worry about it not being carried out the way I want to carry it out. Haman returned to carry out the command, and he did just what the king told him to do. And Mordecai was led with royal honor through the streets. Haman returned home crushed, but he had no time to brood because he had to be at the royal palace in time for Queen Esther's second banquet. So that kind of soothed him a little bit. And then once again, when they get there, and Queen Esther comes in, the king comes in, he asked her once again in front of Haman, what is it you desire, Esther? And he was eager because he wanted to do as she pleased. Why have you invited us here again? Speak, and it shall be done. This time Esther says, spare my life and the lives of my people, because we have been sentenced to death. And so the king doesn't know what she's talking about. Death, your people. By whom? Queried the surprised king. So therefore she had to reveal her heritage. And she says, by an evil and wicked man, your minister Haman. Well, you know, Haman's standing right there. So astounded and speechless, the king leaves the room to regain his composure. Trembling and fearful, the king is out of the room now. Haman throws himself on the queen to beg for mercy, just as the king returned. Well, he was thinking mistakenly that Haman was attacking Esther, not begging her for mercy, but attacking her. So he ordered him removed from the room and hanged. Ironically, Haman was hanged on the very gallows that he had constructed for Mordecai. Mordecai was appointed prime minister to fill Haman's place. So according to Persian law, it's not possible to change a decree stamp with the royal seal, as Haman had done. So the decree against the Jews could not be canceled because it had already been made into law. It had already been enacted. However, Mordecai was given the royal signet ring to issue whatever new decrees he thought necessary to save his people. Now it was Mordecai's turn to write the letter and to use the seal. His letter granted the Jews in their kingdom the ability to organize and defend themselves on the 13th of Adar, which was the appointed day. The Persians were happy to carry out Haman's decree to kill the Jews, but since the Jews were granted the ability to defend themselves under royal protection, it became a different story. Oh, well, this sounded like a good idea until they were told they could fight back. So, maybe it's not such a grand plan after all. So this is what happened, and her people were saved, and she went on, and the king didn't kill her because she came in uninvited or anything like that. So my take on this is that the story of Esther is a perfect example of how we apply our divine power of faith. She could have been killed, but she had prayed, she had fasted, she had had the people to do the same thing. So that was in preparation. Just like the women who went to minister to the body of Jesus after it was taken to the cross. They had no idea the stone had been placed. They had no idea how they were going to get in there, but yet they gathered up the material and they went. So nobody said, well, I don't know about this. How are we going to move the stone? Nobody was questioning. They weren't going back and forth about it. But that was faith. That's what you call faith. And I think that this applies to us, too. So think about what could have happened going to the king like that. Nobody, much less a woman, was to go to the king uninvited. So she did this at great peril to herself. But she didn't think about that. She had faith. She kept her faith. So how does this apply to us? Well, the way I look at it is that we have all been kept for such a time as this. We have trouble. And what's the name of that song? 76 trombones, trouble in, what's the name of the city?
River City.
River City. So we've got trouble in River City, folks. Don't we? Okay? So do we give in to that? Or do we keep our faith and know that all is well and in divine order and that it will be okay? And we don't give in to the fear of who we're going to keep out or what we're going to do to this person or that person. We have faith that all will at some point, in some way, somehow, I don't know, it'll work out. And we have to keep the faith. So looking at the story through the metaphysical lens that we in Unity do, and again, this is Unity principle number 5, because they were applying the principles to what was going on. They didn't know that, and they didn't have Unity, and they didn't have the 5 principles up on the wall, but that didn't make any difference. They were still applying these principles. They prepared, they fasted, they meditated, they prayed, they prepared. And not only did she and Mordecai do it, everybody was called upon to do it. I wouldn't even be surprised if some people who were not Jewish might have done it. Because after all, we are all in this together, whether we want to believe it or not. So it reveals, the metaphysical lens reveals that the characters that had a spiritual focus triumphed and were saved. That was Esther and Mordecai. Haman was strictly ego, sense consciousness. I want what I want, and I want it now. But Esther and Mordecai and the others were able to keep the faith and practice the principles. And this is what we're being called upon to do. And whatever you may call it, you can call it Unity principles, you can call it whatever you want, but it's the same thing. We were put here for such a time as this. And I know that because we're still here. It's not like my friend, bless her heart, who left, or my other friend who left, or the famous person who left. We're still here because we were put here for such a time as this. So we hope that we can practice those principles and have faith, yes, faith, that all will be well somehow. So thank you. Have a blessed day. And a happy New Year for such a time as this. Okay. As we go in to the inner chamber, and we take a deep breath in and release, and one other deep breath in and release. And as the breath is the connection, we relax into the presence of the Holy Spirit. And we go within and we ask the presence, the Spirit, God, whatever you may wish to call, that our strength, our faith be strengthened at this time, especially at this time, as we go about to do what needs to be done. And we use our faith to ask, what is mine to do? What is mine to do in order to be a healing presence at such a time as this? What is mine to do in the midst of chaos that we see all around us? What is mine to do as we deal with the changes that have been brought about in our climate and in other areas of our life? What is mine to do? How am I to stay focused? How am I to stay centered? How am I to resist the urge, the temptation to give in to the appearances all around us? What is mine to do to seek and to know the truth of our being? What is mine to do? So let's just take a few moments to contemplate that before we return to the outer. So now we come to this time where we come back into this room, into this place, but it's not with sadness, because we know that we can go back at any time. What is mine to do? Knowing that one of the things that we can all do, in addition to individually what is mine to do, is to forgive. So let's come back with that. And open our eyes. Let's just take another deep breath in. Yes.
70, the Lord's Prayer.